Have you ever noticed how certain men return again and again, even after moments that felt like the end? Even after intimacy that seemed to close a chapter, there's a gravitational pull, an invisible thread pulling them back. Not because of words spoken or physical chemistry alone, but because of something deeper, something that doesn't shout but hums, something powerful and silent, almost mystical. What if I told you this phenomenon isn't accidental, and it has little to do with what you said or how you touched him? What if it originates from something far more transcendent, a posture of soul? Carl Jung, one of the most profound minds of 20th century psychology, understood this mystery well. He didn't see relationships as merely behavioral exchanges, but as alchemical crucibles, where our unconscious minds speak louder than our conscious ones. He believed that each person carries within them a hidden force, an unconscious energy, that governs attraction, connection, and separation alike. And in the aftermath of intimacy, when the physical moment ends but the emotional and energetic bonds remain, that force reveals itself most powerfully. It's not about what you say after. It's about how you relate to yourself when he's no longer present. That moment, often filled with silence and uncertainty, is the true epicenter of power, or of loss. Most people rush to act in those moments, sending texts, seeking closure, analyzing every word, reading signals. But Jung would say, pause, because there's something happening beneath the surface. In you and in him. You are not just two bodies temporarily entwined. You are two psyches that, in that vulnerable state of intimacy, open doors to ancient energies, unconscious patterns, emotional projections, and even ancestral wounds. Every word, every glance, every sigh during those moments carried symbols, what Jung called archetypes. And after it's over, your emotional response becomes a mirror for those energies. If you panic, if you chase, if you collapse into neediness, even silently, he feels it, not through reason or logic, but through an inner language that bypasses thought entirely. His unconscious registers it as lack, as fear, as emotional weight. Something inside him resists returning, not because of you, but because of the energy you project when you lose yourself. But what if instead of losing yourself, you did something radical? What if you returned to yourself? What if, in that moment of aching vulnerability, you embraced your solitude as sacred rather than unbearable? What if you sat with your discomfort, held your heart with tenderness, and said, I am still whole? That's not just self-help talk. That's alchemy. That's emotional sovereignty. And it's magnetic in ways no words ever can be. In fact, that kind of centeredness speaks directly to the deepest part of a man, the part he's often been taught to deny. You see, Jung believed that within every man lies an inner feminine, what he called the anima. It is his capacity for feeling, intuition, emotional connection. But in many men, that part remains buried, shamed, or forgotten. So when he meets a woman who is fully in tune with herself, not clinging, not pleading, not posturing, but grounded, graceful, aware, something wakes up in him. He doesn't just remember her, he remembers himself, a forgotten part. She becomes a living mirror for what he's been, unconsciously seeking, not validation, but emotional wholeness. And this is where the invisible pull begins. When you remain emotionally available but rooted in self-respect, when you don't try to fill the silence with demands or explanations, when your energy says, I'm here, but I don't need you to be whole, you activate something in his unconscious. You become, in Jungian terms, a projection field for his own growth. Not because you did anything manipulative, but because you stayed true to yourself. This is what makes you unforgettable. And yet, this power is not something you use to get him back. It's not a strategy. It's a path of maturity. It's about who you become in the absence of reassurance. Do you collapse into stories of rejection and abandonment? Or do you meet your own heart with reverence? Do you chase to soothe your pain? Or do you sit with the discomfort and alchemize it into strength? Because here's the truth. Jung knew every relationship reveals your relationship with yourself. And after intimacy, when the rawest, realest parts of you have been seen, your next move speaks volumes, not just to him, but to your own soul. This is a moment where healing or repetition is born. Either you step into old habits, repeating ancient scripts of anxiety, grasping and self-erasure, or you begin something new. That new begins with presence, not silence as punishment, not detachment as manipulation, but presence to your own body, your own breath, your own longings. You light a candle, you breathe slowly, you speak kindly to yourself, you go for a walk, you don't push the emotions away, you don't blame him, you feel without drowning. You become the woman who doesn't abandon herself. And that kind of energy, it doesn't beg to be chased. It is chased because it evokes peace. Because it offers a kind of emotional safety most men have never known. Not softness without boundaries. Not cold detachment, but dignified openness. Mature vulnerability. You become a space where his soul wants to return. Not because you made him, but because he felt something real. Jung called this the process of individuation, the journey of becoming fully yourself. And he believed this path is impossible without intimate relationships, because it's in the reflection of another that we see who we truly are. The parts we love, the parts we hide, the parts we fear. But the real question is, what do you do with what's revealed? Do you run from it, or do you integrate it? And when he disappears, as many do, temporarily, do you lose your ground, or do you go deeper into yourself? Because that moment, the one you think is about him, is really about you. This is the beginning of your greatest emotional freedom. Not because he comes back, but because whether he does or not, you come back to yourself. So what happens next? In that haunting silence after connection, after skin has touched skin, after eyes have seen what words could never name, when he vanishes into his world, and you're left holding an invisible presence in your hands, what do you do? This is the crossroads, the place most women find unbearable, not because of the man, but because of what that emptiness awakens within. This is the moment that tests your center, the place where projection meets truth. Carl Jung believed that every outer event activates something from the inner world, and what appears to be abandonment or indifference might, in fact, be life inviting you back into your own depths. He has left, for now. The silence is not your enemy. It is your mirror. This is not the time to make it about him. It is the sacred time to make it about you. Not with ego or pride, but with reverence. Because the truth is, after real intimacy, both people are changed. Something of you is now in him, and something of him lives inside you. Whether either of you admits it consciously or not, the soul recognizes what the mind tries to deny. And what matters most is not whether he texts tomorrow or in a month, but whether you return to yourself today. Because if you don't, you risk losing your center for a fantasy. You risk collapsing your emotional power into the hope that someone else will validate it. And once you give your center away, it's hard to find your way back. Jung taught that wholeness is the real goal of the psyche. Not perfection, not control, but integration. So what if this very moment of confusion and quiet pain is actually part of that sacred integration? What if you're not supposed to know what he's feeling or planning? What if you're supposed to know you? This is your invitation to pause and to turn your gaze inward. Most women were not taught how to sit with unknowing. We were taught to decode, to fix, to please, to adapt. We weren't shown how to simply be, to allow mystery, to hold pain with grace, to feel desire without shame. But it is precisely that kind of woman, the woman who doesn't run from herself in moments of intensity, who becomes unforgettable, not because she performs strength, but because she is anchored in it. Now imagine this. He walks away from you after intimacy, distracted, unsure, maybe even overwhelmed. But what lingers with him isn't your body, it's your calm, your stillness, the way you didn't chase, the way you didn't shame him or beg for answers, the way your eyes held depth, not demand. That quiet presence, that haunts him more than any message could. He might not know what he's feeling, but something feels different, something sacred. Why? Because you didn't collapse. You didn't betray yourself to try to hold on to him. Instead, you went inward, not as punishment, but as a practice of self-anchoring. This is what makes the feminine truly magnetic, not surface charm, but rootedness. Not manipulation, but embodiment. Jung wrote extensively about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we reject, suppress, and disown. He believed that true healing happens only when we face these shadow parts, especially in love. After intimacy, your shadow awakens. You might feel anxiety, fear of rejection, the ancient ache of unworthiness. And this is the moment to hold those feelings. Not silence them, not shame them, but greet them like old friends returning with messages. This act of emotional self-holding is revolutionary. It says, I don't need to control the outcome. I trust the process. It says, I may want him, but I don't need him to remember who I am. It says, even in this space of longing, I belong fully to myself. And the paradox? That's what draws him closer. Not because you manipulated him, but because your energy is rare. You're not echoing need. You're radiating presence. Understand this. A man doesn't return because you chased him down with clever texts or sexy photos. He returns because being near you felt like coming home, not just to you, but to himself. Because in your wholeness, he saw a glimpse of his own. Because in your stillness, he felt something he didn't know he was missing. You became a sanctuary, not a storm. Jung believed that the anima, the inner feminine within men, often shows up through projection. He sees in a woman what he can't yet access in himself. And when a woman is emotionally whole, she doesn't carry his emotional burdens. She doesn't try to fix or complete him. Instead, she holds a mirror to his soul. That's why some men run at first, because the mirror is too clear. They're not ready to see what it shows. But over time, something calls them back, not to the woman as an object, but to the reflection of truth she once offered. And that truth was never about control. It was about energy. Energy that says, I am here, I am open, I am grounded, and I will not abandon myself, even for love. That kind of energy lingers in a man's psyche. It speaks louder than pleas or explanations. And when the distractions wear off, when the noise of life quiets, he remembers not what you said, but how he felt in your presence. And that feeling becomes a thread pulling him back, again and again. Not because you summoned him, but because your essence stayed with him. But here is the deeper gift. Even if he doesn't return, you have. You have returned to yourself. And that return is everything. Because when you walk through the aftermath of intimacy, with grace and self-respect, something shifts permanently. You stop needing others to validate your worth. You stop using love as an escape from yourself. You begin to love with freedom, not fear. You become the woman who no longer abandons herself. And that woman? She attracts not just lovers, but life itself. Opportunities, friendships, and soul-deep connections find her. Because she has become a clear channel for authenticity. She doesn't perform. She doesn't chase. She becomes. So when he returns, if he returns, it won't be to a woman waiting in fear. It will be to a woman who stood in her own fire and did not burn. A woman who chose inner peace over external control. A woman who knew that her value was never in being chosen, but in choosing herself again and again. That is the sacred return. Not his, yours. And when your return is complete, any love that arrives is simply a reflection of the wholeness already alive within you. Now that you've returned to yourself, something subtle but profound has changed. It's no longer about whether he comes back or not. It's about who you are, and how deeply rooted you've become in your own truth. The very energy you now carry radiates differently. It speaks before you enter a room. It whispers in your silence. It lingers in the space others try to fill with noise. This isn't about strategy. This is about presence, and presence cannot be faked. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." After intimacy, when the masks fall away and the illusions crumble, this is the real awakening. The man may be gone, for a time or forever, but the real presence you're learning to hold is you. Many women, in their moments of post-intimacy vulnerability, fall into a loop of overthinking. Did I do something wrong? Did I say too much? Was I not enough? But these questions come not from intuition, but from fear. From the shadow, as Jung would say. The place in us that believes we must earn love, prove our worth, or fix ourselves to be chosen. But what if there was nothing to fix? What if the silence after intimacy isn't a punishment but a portal? A sacred space where you are invited to meet your unmet parts, not with judgment, but with deep tenderness? This is the emotional maturity Jung pointed toward, the ability to sit with contradiction, with desire and fear, with longing and letting go, without losing yourself. When you do this, something extraordinary happens. You break the cycle of emotional dependence that has haunted generations. You become the beginning of a new lineage, one where women don't abandon themselves to keep someone else, one where connection is built not on need, but on mutual wholeness. You begin to embody what Jung called the individuated self, a woman who is not defined by relationship status, external approval, or romantic reassurance. You are no longer waiting to be chosen. You are choosing yourself moment by moment, not in defiance, not in ego, but in sacred self-remembering. And what happens to a man when he senses this? Something ancient stirs. He may not articulate it, he may not fully understand it, but on a soul level, he feels it. Her energy doesn't pull on him, it calls him upward. She is not asking him to rescue her from herself. She is inviting him, silently, to meet himself more fully. This is the unconscious magnetism Jung described. Not seduction, but elevation. Not emotional need, but soulful presence. It draws from him not the performance of a man, but the essence of one. And this is why so many men come back. Not because the woman sent the perfect message or waited the perfect number of days, but because in her absence, he was left alone with his own truth, and it echoed with the memory of her. Not the memory of her words or her body, but the memory of how he felt in her presence, how whole he felt, how seen, how calm. And yet this return, should it happen, is not your reward. It is simply life reflecting back the wholeness you've cultivated inside. The true reward is who you became in his absence, the inner strength you discovered when no one else was holding you, the love you offered yourself when no one else did. And sometimes, he doesn't come back. Or he does, but not ready. Still half asleep in his own emotional avoidance. Still entangled in his unhealed fears. And this is where your deepest wisdom must lead. You do not chase shadows. You do not shrink to fit what is not willing to grow. You do not abandon your own evolution to nurse someone else's refusal to evolve. Jung taught that not all connections are meant to last, but all are meant to teach. Some people come into our lives not to stay, but to awaken us, to show us the places we still cling, the fears we haven't yet faced, the power we've been afraid to own. So if he doesn't return, or doesn't return in the way you hoped, it's not a failure. It's clarity. It's grace. It's the soul's way of saying, you have outgrown this story. There is more. And that more begins not with someone new, but with a new version of you. A version of you who walks differently, who breathes deeper, who no longer uses love to escape, but to expand. A version of you who listens not just with ears, but with the entire body, to intuition, to soul, to silence. A version of you who no longer performs to be loved, but simply is, and allows that authenticity to draw in what is aligned. From this place, you begin to see intimacy differently. No longer as a way to be validated, but as a sacred exchange of energy. No longer as something to manipulate or fear, but as a space to explore truth. You stop measuring a relationship by its duration, and start measuring it by its depth. You start asking new questions. Does this connection reflect my truth? Do I feel more myself or less in his presence? Is he meeting me from wholeness or seeking to be rescued? And perhaps most powerfully, can I love him without losing myself? When the answer is yes, not as theory, but as lived experience, You've reached the level of emotional sovereignty Jung spoke of so often. A place where love is not desperate but deliberate. Where connection isn't clung to but cherished. Where endings aren't feared but seen as necessary compost for future blooming. This is the true alchemy of intimacy. It's not just about who touches your body. It's about who touches your soul and how you hold yourself when that soul is no longer near. You are not here to perform wholeness. You are here to remember it, not to prove your worth, but to embody it. And in that embodiment, something magical happens. Whether he returns or not, life starts to align with your inner truth. People come into your life who meet you where you are, not because you chased them, but because you called them. Through energy, through alignment, through integrity. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. But now you are conscious. You are awake. You are no longer waiting to be seen. You see yourself. And that is the real return. Not his, but yours. You have come home.